Sometimes that's people perception out of that kind of thing, but I don't think happy-go-lucky. I think optimist, positive to a fault, really looking on the bright side to a fault. I think that's true.
What if I told you that one of America's most beloved singers, the man who gave us Take Me Home Country Roads and seemed like the nicest guy in the world, was actually hiding some very dark secrets? Today, we're going to talk about John Denver, and I have to warn you, what you're about to learn might completely change how you think about this famous musician forever. For decades, people have wondered about the real John Denver. Sure, we all knew his beautiful songs about nature and love. We saw his gentle smile on TV and heard his soft voice singing about mountain highs and country roads. But behind all that wholesome image was a man struggling with demons that would eventually destroy his career, his relationships, and ultimately, his life. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just about a famous singer. It's about how fame can change a person, how success doesn't always bring happiness, and how even the people we admire most can have sides to them that shock us to our core. Let's start from the beginning. John Denver wasn't even his real name. He was born Henry John Deutschendorf on the very last day of 1943 in Roswell, New Mexico. Yes, that Roswell, the same place people talk about when they mention UFOs, but there was nothing mysterious about young Henry's childhood, except maybe how lonely it was. His father was a military pilot, which sounds pretty cool, right? Captain Henry Deutschendorf Sr. was actually a hero who set speed records flying bomber planes and even made it into the Air Force Hall of Fame. But here's the thing about military life. You move around a lot. Henry's family moved from New Mexico to Arizona, then to Alabama, then to Texas, and who knows where else. Imagine being a kid, and just when you start making friends at school, your parents tell you it's time to pack up and move again. That's exactly what happened to Henry over and over. He never got to stay in one place long enough to feel like he truly belonged anywhere. This feeling of not belonging would follow him for his entire life, and it probably explains a lot about what happened later. When Henry was 11 years old, something special happened. His grandmother gave him an old guitar from 1910. By the time it reached his hands, that guitar was already over 40 years old. But for Henry, it became the most important thing he owned. While everything else in his life kept changing, that guitar stayed the same. It became his best friend during those lonely times when he felt like he didn't fit in anywhere. He started learning to play and discovered he had a real talent for music. He joined something called the Tucson, Arizona Boys Chorus, where he learned how to sing with other people and perform on stage. By high school, he was already playing folk songs at small shows around town. Music wasn't just something fun for him to do. It was becoming his way of dealing with a world that never seemed to stop changing. But there was a problem. Henry's father, who everyone called Dutch, was a very strict man who expected his son to be perfect at everything. Dutch wanted Henry to follow in his footsteps, to be tough and successful like a military man should be. But Henry was a gentle soul who just wanted to write songs and play music. This created a lot of tension between father and son. The one thing they could agree on was flying. When Henry learned to pilot airplanes, it gave him and his father something they could finally enjoy together. Flying made Henry feel free, like he could escape all his problems and just soar above the world. That feeling of freedom would show up in his music later, but it would also lead to some very dangerous choices. After high school, Henry went to Texas Tech University to study architecture. His plan was to design buildings for a living, but after just a short time in college, he realized he didn't want to spend his life drawing blueprints. He wanted to make music, so he did something that probably terrified his parents. He dropped out of college and moved to Los Angeles to chase his dream. Around this time, he decided to change his last name. Deutschendorf was too hard for people to remember and pronounce. He chose Denver after the capital city of Colorado because he loved that state's beautiful mountains and rivers. It felt like a fresh start, a new beginning for a young man who had never really felt settled anywhere. In the mid-1960s, Henry got his big break. There was a popular folk group called the Chad Mitchell Trio, and they needed a new lead singer. About 200 people auditioned for the job, but they chose Henry. This was his first real chance to make it in the music business. For about 2 years, he traveled all over the country with the Chad Mitchell Trio, performing in front of crowds and recording albums. Being on stage helped him become more confident as a performer. Life on the road was hard, but Henry soaked up every experience and slowly began to find his own voice as an artist. During this time, he wrote one of his most famous songs, Leaving on a Jet Plane. Another folk group called Peter, Paul, and Mary recorded it, and by the end of the 1960s, it had become a #1 hit. Even though Henry wasn't famous yet as a solo artist, this song proved that he could write music that really touched people's hearts. When the Chad Mitchell Trio broke up, Henry didn't look back. He was ready to become a star on his own. Going from being part of a group to being a solo artist isn't easy, but Henry made it look simple. His career really took off in the early 1970s when he released an album called Poems, Prayers, and Promises. The song Take Me Home Country Roads became an instant classic. But here's something interesting. It almost never happened. The first copies of the song had sound problems, and for a while it looked like it might flop completely. But Henry's manager Jerry Weintraub didn't give up. He convinced radio stations to play the song, starting in Denver, Colorado. The song was released in April, and slowly but surely people started falling in love with it. By August, it had reached #2 on the Billboard charts. It sold over 1 million copies and went gold that same month. Over the years, it became so popular that West Virginia made it one of their official state songs. In 1972, Henry followed up with another album called Rocky Mountain High. The title song became another huge hit, making it into the top 10. Decades later, Colorado made Rocky Mountain High one of their official state songs, too. Henry was becoming more than just a singer. He was becoming the voice of America's love for nature and the great outdoors. The years 1974 and 1975 were absolutely incredible for Henry, who was now known to the world as John Denver. In just 18 months, he had 4 different songs reach #1 on the charts. Sunshine on My Shoulders hit the top in March 1974. Then Annie's song followed in July. Thank God I'm a Country Boy reached #1 in May 1975, and I'm Sorry hit the top in September of that same year. These songs showed just how talented Denver really was. Some were gentle and peaceful, like Sunshine on My Shoulders. Others were full of energy and joy, like Thank God I'm a Country Boy. Annie's song, which he wrote in just 10 minutes for his wife, became a favorite at weddings all over the country. During this amazing time, Denver also released 3 albums that all went to #1. His Greatest Hits album became the best-selling record in RCA Records history. It even sold more copies than Elvis Presley's albums. By the end of his career, he had created about 300 songs and written around 200 of them himself. Worldwide, his music sold more than 33 million copies. But here's where our story starts to take a dark turn. Success and fame were changing John Denver, and not in a good way. The gentle, nature-loving singer that fans saw on TV was starting to become someone very different in private. Denver's first marriage was to a woman named Annie Martell. Their love story seemed perfect at first. He even wrote that famous song, Annie's Song, for her in just 10 minutes. They adopted 2 children together in Low. Okayed like the perfect family. But as Denver's fame grew bigger and bigger, their relationship started falling apart. Annie began to feel invisible, like she was living in her husband's shadow. Denver was always traveling, always working, always focused on his career. The man who sang about love and peace at home was becoming distant and hard to live with. By the early 1980s, they decided to get divorced. What happened next shocked everyone who knew them. Though Denver seemed so gentle and kind in public, he acted very differently when the cameras weren't rolling. People who were there said he became angry and unpredictable during the divorce. The most shocking story involved some oak trees. After Annie cut down some of Denver's favorite oak trees at their home in Aspen, Colorado, he completely lost control. Instead of just arguing about it like most people would, Denver showed up at the house with a chainsaw. He didn't just cut down more trees, he cut their furniture into pieces. He even sawed their bed in half right down the middle. Can you imagine that? The same man who sang beautiful love songs about nature and peace took a chainsaw and destroyed the furniture in his own home. Friends and neighbors who saw this couldn't believe it was the same soft-spoken singer they thought they knew. The divorce was bitter and ugly. Court papers revealed stories of abuse that completely damaged Denver's clean, wholesome image. Friends supported Annie's side of the story, and even some of Denver's former managers admitted that he had a very dark temper when he got angry. But Denver's personal problems were just getting started. In the mid-1980s, he met an Australian singer and actress named Cassandra Delaney. They met at a hotel in Sydney where Denver was performing, and he was immediately attracted to her. Their romance moved very quickly, and by the late 1980s, they had a beautiful mountain wedding that looked like something out of a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't always have happy endings. From the very beginning, there were serious problems in their marriage. Cassandra was much younger than Denver, and she later said that being married to such a famous man was incredibly difficult. His fame followed them everywhere they went, and his mood could change suddenly without warning. In the late 1980s, their daughter Jessie was born. This should have been a happy time for the family, but instead, it made things worse. Denver became more controlling and jealous. He started watching Cassandra's every move and trying to control what she did and who she talked to. In the mid-1990s, Cassandra gave a shocking interview to an Australian magazine. She described Denver as someone who had no real friends because people were afraid of him. She said his office workers were scared to be around him, and secretaries often cried and quit their jobs because he was so mean to them. According to Cassandra, the gentle, peaceful age that Denver showed the world was just an act. In private, she said he was often angry and harsh. She claimed he drank too much alcohol, yelled at her all the time, and tried to control every aspect of her life. She had stayed quiet for years, hoping he would change, but nothing helped. They separated in the early 1990s, and their divorce was finalized a couple of years later. The legal battle was nasty. Denver sued Cassandra for several $million and accused her of trying to make him look bad. Meanwhile, Cassandra fought hard to keep custody of their daughter Jessie. Denver later wrote about this painful time in his autobiography called Take Me Home, which was published in the mid-1990s. The book shocked his fans because he admitted to doing things that completely went against his wholesome image. In the book, Denver confessed to using illegal drugs like marijuana, LSD, and cocaine. He also admitted to cheating on both of his wives with other women. Even his first marriage to Annie Martel, which had inspired the beautiful song Annie's Song, had been filled with affairs and betrayals. He wrote about times when he had acted violently, including that incident with the chainsaw where he cut their bed in half. His clean, perfect image was completely shattered. Fans who had loved and respected him for decades suddenly saw a side of him they never could have imagined. But Denver's problems weren't just personal, they were also professional. By the middle of the 1980s, the music industry was changing. The soft, acoustic folk style that had made Denver famous was going out of fashion. People wanted music with heavy synthesizers and drum machines, not gentle guitar songs about nature. In 1986, something devastating happened. RCA Records, the company that had supported Denver through 25 albums and made millions of dollars from his music, decided to drop him. They had just been sold to General Electric, and the new owners wanted to save money by focusing on newer, younger artists. Denver was shocked. He had just finished what he thought would be his next album with them, and he believed renewing his contract was guaranteed. Instead, RCA chose to move on without him, thinking they could make more money from other artists. Denver said they had taken him for granted, even after all the success and profit he had brought them over the years. With no major record label willing to sign him, Denver had to start his own small company called Windstar Records to release his music. It was a tough lesson that even the biggest stars can be left behind when trends change and business goals shift. Meanwhile, Denver was developing another serious problem: trouble with alcohol and the law. Flying had always been his greatest passion, something he shared with his father, and that made him feel free and happy. Over the years, he had spent more than 20,000 hours in the air and earned licenses to fly all kinds of aircraft. But in the 1990s, Denver was arrested not once, but twice for driving under the influence of alcohol. This was a huge problem because pilots need something called a medical certificate to prove they're fit to fly safely. After his second arrest, the Federal Aviation Administration refused to renew his medical certificate. Without that certificate, Denver's pilot's license was basically worthless. To get it back, he would have had to prove that he no longer had a drinking problem and complete a bunch of requirements. but he never did what was necessary to get his flying privileges restored legally. What made this situation even worse was how Denver responded to the FAA's demands. When they sent him official letters telling him to give up his medical certificate, he either ignored them completely or sent them back unopened. Because he never officially accepted these letters, the FAA couldn't complete the legal process to ground him. So on paper, it looked like he could still fly, but only because of this technical loophole. That loophole finally closed in March 1997. Denver signed for one of the FAA's certified letters, which meant they could officially take away his right to fly. From that moment on, every time he got in an airplane, he was breaking the law. But none of this stopped John Denver from flying. On October 12, 1997, he took out a small experimental aircraft that he had bought just one day earlier. He was practicing takeoffs and landings near Monterey, California. He had spent only about half an hour with an instructor learning how to fly this particular plane before going up alone. The aircraft had been heavily modified by its previous owner, and these changes made it much more difficult and dangerous to operate than a normal plane. One major problem was something called the fuel selector valve. In most planes, this valve is easy to reach, so pilots can switch between fuel tanks if needed. But in Denver's plane, it had been moved to a spot behind the pilot's left shoulder where it was very hard to reach. To switch fuel tanks, Denver had to twist around in his seat and reach back awkwardly. The valve was so stiff that it often needed pliers to turn it. Even worse, the fuel gauges that showed how much gas was left were also behind him, so he couldn't see them while flying normally. He needed to use a handheld mirror to check how much fuel he had, and even then, the readings weren't clear. That morning, while practicing takeoffs and landings near Monterey Peninsula Airport, Denver used up all the fuel in his left tank. Witnesses on the ground heard his engine start to sputter and then go completely silent. As the fuel ran out, Denver tried desperately to switch to his right fuel tank. To do this, he had to reach behind him with pliers and try to turn that difficult valve. But while he was twisted around trying to reach it, he accidentally pressed hard on the right rudder pedal with his foot. This caused the plane's nose to dip sharply downward. Within just a few seconds, the small aircraft crashed into the Pacific Ocean. John Denver was killed instantly. He was 53 years old. When investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board looked into the crash, they found several things that could have prevented this tragedy. First, Denver had started his flight with dangerously low fuel, only about 3 gallons in one tank and 6 in the other. For the kind of flying he was doing, this wasn't nearly enough. They also found that Denver's unfamiliarity with this particular aircraft was a major factor in the crash. He had owned the plane for only one day and had barely any training on how to operate it safely. The investigators also criticized the unsafe design changes that made switching fuel tanks during flight nearly impossible. Even though Denver was actually a skilled pilot with thousands of hours of experience, he hadn't properly prepared for flying this specific plane. The report made it clear that the crash could have been easily avoided if Denver had just made better choices, refueling properly, getting more training, or flying a plane with a safer fuel system. Denver's death wasn't just a tragic accident, it was the final result of a pattern of risky behavior that had been building for years. His deep love for flying had crossed the line into dangerous territory. He was known for doing risky things like performing glider tricks with the engine turned off and continuing to fly even when he didn't have legal permission. Even after aviation authorities had warned him many times and officially taken away his medical certificate, he kept flying anyway. The crash showed a series of poor decisions: flying with too little fuel, using a plane with known safety problems, and going up alone without even filing a flight plan to let anyone know where he was going. Although no drugs or alcohol were found in Denver's body after the crash, his earlier arrests for drunk driving had already damaged his reputation. People started to see a pattern of someone who took dangerous risks and didn't follow important safety rules. Despite all these revelations about his personal struggles and poor choices, John Denver's musical legacy has remained strong. His songs continue to touch people all over the world with their messages of peace, love for nature, and deep emotion. Classics like Take Me Home, Country Roads, Annie's Song, and Rocky Mountain High are still played on the radio and loved by new generations of fans. Denver was also ahead of his time when it came to caring about the environment. Long before it became popular for celebrities to support environmental causes, he was using his fame to raise awareness about protecting our planet. He started foundations, organized tree planting projects, and gave benefit concerts to help people in need. In the end, people choose to remember John Denver for his beautiful music and his love of nature, rather than for the mistakes he made in his personal life. There's even a 15-foot bronze statue of him at Red Rocks Amphitheater in Colorado that reminds fans of the positive impact he had on the world. The story of John Denver teaches us something important about fame and success. Just because someone is talented and beloved by millions doesn't mean they don't struggle with serious personal problems. The pressure of being famous, the loneliness of life on the road, and the temptations that come with success can change people in ways that shock even those closest to them. Denver's life was a mixture of incredible artistic success and personal tragedy. He gave the world some of the most beautiful songs ever written, but he also hurt the people he loved and made choices that ultimately cost him his life. It's a reminder that our heroes are human beings with flaws and struggles just like the rest of us. The mystery of John Denver has finally been solved, and while the truth isn't pretty, it doesn't erase the joy his music has brought to millions of people around the world. His songs about country roads, mountain highs, and sunshine on shoulders will live on long after the painful details of his personal life are forgotten. So there you have it, the real story behind one of America's most beloved singers. It's not the story his fans wanted to hear, but it's the truth about a talented but troubled man who gave us beautiful music while fighting demons that eventually destroyed him. If this story opened your eyes to a side of John Denver you never knew existed, please hit that like button and share this video with others who might be interested. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more shocking stories about the celebrities you thought you knew. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.